I sat there in silence, the weight of my cane resting against the booth, while my son's laughter cut through the diner like a blade. "Look who waddled in," he said, loud enough for strangers to turn. My hand didn't shake. Not yet. I'd once walked hospital halls just to afford his braces, worked double shifts through back pain and pride. Now he laughed at the one thing keeping me upright. The check came. I let him pay for it. He thought that made him generous. It didn't. It made him accountable. And his payments were about to begin. All right. Before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The bell above Carla's diner door gave a tired jingle as Ruth Delaney pushed it open, her cane tapping against the tile in a slow, steady rhythm. The place smelled like butter and coffee, comfort and judgment all at once. She'd worn her good coat, the gray wool one that hid the stiffness in her hip. It didn't hide the cane, though. Nothing did. Ethan was already there, sprawled in the corner booth like a man waiting to be congratulated for showing up. Melissa sat across from him, stirring her iced tea, smiling the kind of smile that only lasted for photos. "Look who shuffled in like a penguin," Ethan called out before his mother even reached the table. The joke hit the air like a dropped plate, sharp, shattering, final. Melissa's giggle was thin, half-hearted. She tried to bury it behind her wineglass. But Ruth caught it anyway. A lifetime of numbers had taught her to notice the smallest things, even the crack in someone's courtesy. Ruth didn't stop walking. Her cane clicked twice more before she reached the booth. "Evening," she said, voice calm, eyes cool. She eased herself onto the seat, one hand folded over the cane's curved handle. Ethan grinned too wide, the grin of a man afraid of silence. "Just teasing, Ma. You know me. Always, the comedian." Carla Sims came from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah, I know you," she said flatly. "You paying for this meal, Penguin?" That got a snort from one of the regulars at the counter. Ethan's face tightened. Then he forced a laugh. "Hey now, just family fun." Carla didn't move. She stared him down the way she used to stare down rude customers who complained about the price of pie. Ethan looked away first. Ruth opened the menu, though she already knew what she wanted. Coffee, chicken pot pie, and quiet. The kind of quiet that made men like Ethan fidget. "So, how's retirement treating you?" Melissa asked finally, her tone too sweet to be sincere. "Busy enough," Ruth said, scanning the menu for no reason. "Numbers don't rest just because I do." Ethan drummed his fingers on the table. "You still balancing ledgers for fun? I thought retirement was supposed to be relaxing." "It is," Ruth said, "when I choose who gets my time." He didn't catch the warning in it. He never did. Their food came. Carla set the plates down with more force than necessary. "Enjoy," she said, her eyes lingering on Ethan just long enough to make him uncomfortable. The meal was noisy only in small ways. The scrape of forks, the hum of a fan, the chatter from another booth. But between the three of them, silence grew like a fog. Ruth sipped her coffee, the steam blurring her reflection in the window. She didn't look at Ethan again until the check arrived. When it did, Carla laid it in front of him. Not in the middle of the table. In front of him. Ethan blinked. "Oh, I thought—" Ruth interrupted softly. "You thought wrong." He hesitated, then reached for his wallet with theatrical patience. "Fine, Ma, I'll get it. Consider it my treat." "You're only one tonight," Carla muttered as she walked away. Ruth didn't smile. She pulled a small spiral notebook from her purse, the same kind she used back in her accounting days, and wrote something down. Just one line. Then she closed it and set it beside her coffee. Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing you need to balance," she said, slipping the notebook away. He chuckled nervously, tossing a few bills on the table. "You and your secrets. always scribbling like the world's going to audit you. Ruth stood carefully, pressing on her cane as she rose. The world always does, Ethan, she said quietly. Eventually. The wind outside pushed against the diner windows, rattling them just enough to make the silence feel heavier. Ethan stayed seated, pretending to scroll through his phone. Melissa avoided everyone's eyes. Carla wiped down the counter in long, slow strokes, her gaze following Ruth as she moved toward the door. The cane's rhythm echoed again, one firm tap for every step. Halfway out, Ruth paused, looked over her shoulder, and said, "Thank you for dinner." It wasn't gratitude, it was record-keeping. Outside, she adjusted her coat, squared her shoulders, and walked into the cold night. Behind her, Ethan muttered something about overreacting. Carla leaned over the booth, voice low and sharp. "You just paid for the cheapest lesson you'll ever get." Ethan looked up, confused. Carla nodded toward the door. And she just started keeping score. The night followed Ruth home like a stray thought she couldn't shake. The air outside had teeth, sharp and mean. But inside her modest brick house, everything was in its place. The framed tax license by the door, the scent of lemon oil on the furniture, the hum of a disciplined life. She hung her coat on its hook, leaned her cane by the entry table, and stood still for a long moment. The silence was clean. No snickering, no careless jokes. Just the quiet pulse of the grandfather clock marking time she refused to waste. On the kitchen table sat her old laptop, a reliable relic just like her. She opened it, the screen's glow brushing across her lined face as if reintroducing her to herself. The cursor blinked against a spreadsheet titled Family Assistance. Rows of transactions marched neatly down the page, all identical. $1,500, every 30th of the month, a transfer to E. Delaney joint account. She'd labeled each with tidy precision: support, help, bridge, temporary. All euphemisms for enabling. She scrolled to the most recent entry, the one from last week. The number looked smug sitting there, as if mocking her with every zero. Ruth clicked open her archived messages. Ethan's words glowed in the small window, digital dust she'd never deleted. "As soon as the market rebounds, I'll make it right, Mom. Promise." Just a tough stretch. "I'll pay it back in full." "You're saving my life here." Promises written like invoices he never intended to honor. She reread them without anger, just arithmetic clarity. She never expected repayment, but she had expected respect. Her hand brushed the cane resting against the table leg. For years, it had been just a tool for balance. Tonight, it felt like punctuation. A full stop. Her phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. A message from Carla. "Carla, you good?" "Ruth, better than he's about to be." A soft, humorless smile flickered across her lips. Ruth closed the banking window and opened a new document. The old accountant in her still typed like a metronome. Deliberate, precise. 2. Greg Santos, attorney at law. Subject: Review and recommendation. Greg, please prepare a letter regarding repayment of private family loans. I'll supply documentation and terms in the morning. Include interest rates appropriate for personal loans, but firm enough to command attention. Discretion appreciated. R.D. She reread it, made a small correction to a comma, then printed it on thick cream paper. No digital trail, no easy deletion. The printer whirred softly, the only sound in the house besides her steady breathing. When the page slid out, Ruth took a pen from the ceramic holder beside her ledger and signed her name with a flourish that hadn't lost its sharpness. Then she pulled out her spiral notebook, the one from the diner. She flipped past the line she'd written earlier and added a new entry. 12:30. Audit begins. Subject: ED. Her handwriting was small, neat, and final. A gust of wind rattled the kitchen window. Somewhere outside, a streetlight flickered. On, off. On again. The house across the street still had its Christmas lights up, cheerful and oblivious. Ruth shut her laptop and pushed back from the table. She poured herself a small glass of bourbon, the one indulgence she never logged, and stood by the window watching the reflection of her own face staring back. Older, sharper, undefeated. Her gaze drifted to the stack of bank statements on the counter. For years, she'd filed them in chronological order, a quiet testament to trust. Now, she began rearranging them, not by date, but by decision. Each paper slid into a new pile, past support, evidence, leverage. When she finished, she sat down again, resting her hand over the first page, Ethan's very first emergency. Once upon a time, she murmured to the numbers, "I taught you addition." She closed the folder with a soft click. "Now you'll learn subtraction." The clock chimed midnight. One clean, solitary note that sounded almost like approval. Ruth slipped the signed letter into an envelope, pressed it flat against the table, and drew one final line across her notebook's page. Audit active. Mercy closed. She turned off the light. The printer's cooling fan whirred a few seconds longer, then stopped. In the dark, only the faint outline of her cane was visible beside the chair, waiting, steady, patient. The next morning broke gray and brittle, the kind of winter day that seemed to resent the idea of warmth. Ruth dressed deliberately. Navy wool coat, neat gloves, no perfume. She wasn't going anywhere sentimental. Her cane clicked a steady tempo on the porch steps as she locked the door behind her. The envelope for Greg rested on the passenger seat of her car. Weighty and important. But that wasn't her first stop. The credit union sat on the edge of downtown Indianapolis, a low brick building that smelled faintly of coffee and carpet glue. Familiar territory. Ruth had opened her first account here in 1984, back when Ethan was still a boy who thought interest meant curiosity. The automatic doors parted with a hiss, letting in a gust of cold air and the soft squeak of her cane on polished tile. Linda Chu was waiting near her office, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp but warm. "Morning, Ms. Delaney. Still keeping everyone honest?" "Trying," Ruth said. "Thought I'd start close to home?" Linda smiled knowingly and gestured toward her office. "Come on back. I've got your accounts pulled up already." Inside, the blinds were half closed, the lighting muted, the kind of quiet room where decisions took shape. Ruth sat down slowly, placing her purse on the desk, her cane leaning against her knee like a second spine. "Tell me what you need," Linda said, fingers poised above the keyboard. "I want to pause the recurring transfer, the one to my son's joint account." Linda blinked once. "Pause or freeze?" Ruth's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Freeze, and lock it with a note." Linda turned to the screen, clicking through layers of authorizations. "You want me to flag the reason?" "Yes," Ruth said. "Reason. Audit in progress." The words tasted clean. She hadn't realized until now how much she'd needed to say them aloud. Linda tapped a few keys, then nodded. "Done. It's locked tighter than a bank vault. He won't see it coming." "Good," Ruth said. "Surprise suits him." Linda leaned back, studying her. "Want a receipt?" Ruth shook her head. "No, just the silence when he figures it out." A small laugh escaped Linda before she caught herself. "You're dangerous when you're calm, you know that?" "Calm's how I win," Ruth said. They both knew she wasn't joking. Outside, Ruth paused by the lobby Christmas tree, its lights still twinkling, though half the ornaments sagged. She watched her reflection in a silver bulb. Lined, pale, eyes steady. The image looked like a woman who'd been underestimated for the last time. She tightened her grip on the cane and walked out, her steps firm, decisive, echoing down the hallway. Halfway to her car, she spotted something in the window of the hardware store across the street. A display of walking sticks, each carved from polished wood, gleaming under fluorescent light. She hesitated, then crossed over. The man behind the counter glanced up. "Morning, ma'am. Looking for support or style?" "Both," Ruth said. He brought out a few options. Lightweight aluminum, patterned maple, but one in particular caught her eye. Solid hickory, dark and elegant, with a curved brass handle that fit perfectly in her palm. She tested it on the floor. The sound it made was different, deeper, more deliberate. A sound that could turn heads. "I'll take this one," she said. When she left the shop, the old cane went into the back seat, replaced by the weight of something that felt like resolve made tangible. By afternoon, she was back at Carla's diner. The lunch crowd had thinned, leaving only the hum of the soda machine and the smell of fryer oil. Carla was refilling salt shakers when she spotted her. "That's new," Carla said, nodding at the cane. "Heavier," Ruth replied. "Feels right." Carla studied her a moment longer, eyes narrowing in satisfaction. "You did something today, didn't you?" Ruth stirred her coffee. "Just a small correction in the books." Carla smirked. "And how's your balance?" Ruth glanced down at the hickory cane resting by her side. "Improving." They sat in silence a while, two women who'd seen enough of life to know that some victories didn't make noise. Ruth finished her coffee, left a crisp 10 on the counter, and stood to leave. As she reached the door, Carla called out softly, "He'll feel it soon." Ruth looked back, her expression unreadable. "I'm counting on it." The bell over the door jingled as she stepped into the cold. The new cane struck the pavement with a low, satisfying thud. Not a shuffle, not a stumble, but a declaration. The first missed call came before breakfast, the second, right after. Ruth saw Ethan's name flash across her phone screen, Ethan Delaney in bold white letters, and let it ring until the screen went black. The silence afterward felt like the exhale of a debt collector finally knocking. She poured her coffee, the steam rising into the gray morning light, and settled at the kitchen table with her ledger open. On its newest page, she drew a thin horizontal line, clean, deliberate, then wrote above it in tidy block letters. January 3rd, communication attempts, ignored. Below it, she jotted, 2 calls, 1 voicemail, subject, panic likely setting in. Her pen paused for a beat. She could almost hear his voice. Half charm, half entitlement. Rehearsing an apology that wasn't one. She capped the pen. Enough imagining. She'd spent years hearing him talk his way out of corners. It was time he sat in one. By noon, she was at Carla's diner again. Same booth, same steady rhythm of her new hickory cane against the floor. Carla spotted her and slid a slice of apple pie across the counter before Ruth could even ask. "You going to tell him?" Carla asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Ruth forked a bite of pie, savoring the cinnamon heat. "Not until he earns it." Carla leaned on the counter. "You think he's figured it out yet?" "Oh, he's figuring it out right now," Ruth said. "Probably pacing in his fancy kitchen, wondering why his debit card isn't working for a third coffee pod subscription." Carla chuckled, low and approving. "You always were better with interest than mercy. I learned the returns higher." Outside, the diner windows fogged from the cold. Ruth watched cars slide by on slushy streets, people moving fast and careless, as if the world owed them good traction. Ethan came to mind again. Some habits didn't fade, they just waited for the right conditions to slip. Back home that evening, her inbox pinged. From Ethan Delaney. Subject: "Hey, kinda urgent. Hey mom, weird thing. Bank says transfer didn't go through this month. Must be some mix-up. Can you check? Rent's due, and I've got autopay on a few things. Appreciate it. Love you, Ethan." Ruth read it once, then twice, her lips pressing into a thin line. It was almost poetic. How predictable he'd become. Even his panic had punctuation. She didn't reply. Instead, she clicked open a blank document and pasted the email into it. She labeled it Evidence, January 3rd. Her phone vibrated again. A notification from Facebook. Melissa Delaney had posted a filtered photo of their kitchen counter, a cracked mug beside a single candle. The caption read, "When the budget week hits harder than expected, time for tea and gratitude." Comments flooded in. "Hang in there! And you got this, girl!" Ruth scrolled through them slowly, her expression unreadable. Gratitude, she thought, was free, but apparently not contagious. She picked up her notebook and flipped to a fresh page. Observation: Melissa broadcasting hardship for sympathy. Stage 1, external narrative control. Her handwriting was calm, precise. Each note was a pin in a map she'd been drawing quietly for months. By dusk, the house was dark except for the warm lamplight over her desk. She checked her phone again. One new voicemail. She pressed play, holding the device away from her ear like it might spill nonsense onto her table. "Hey, Mom. Not sure what's going on. Bank's saying something about account access? Anyway, call me back, okay? It's kind of important." She deleted it without listening to the end. Then, as if to balance the ledger of the moment, she opened her spiral and wrote, "Voicemail deleted. Patience intact." Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing ice against the window panes. Ruth sat still, her reflection a dark silhouette over the faint shimmer of her screen. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text this time. "Ethan, please call me Mom." Ruth set the phone face down. The vibration rattled once more and stopped. The silence afterward was sweet. The clean kind of silence that came after closing a book you'd already memorized. She reached for her notebook, added one final entry for the day. Status: audit ongoing. Subject beginning to notice imbalance. Ruth snapped the notebook shut, stood, and leaned on her cane. The brass handle gleamed under the lamp like a seal of authority. Tomorrow, she'd mail Greg the final set of documents. Tonight, she'd let the silence do the teaching. By dawn, the city was still wrapped in ice, each roofline dusted with frost like sugar on something too bitter to eat. Ruth moved through her house quietly, the floorboards creaking in the rhythm of old wood and older patience. On her dining table lay a small stack of papers, neatly aligned. The legal draft Greg Santos had finalized overnight. His email had come at 11:47 p.m. sharp. Subject line: Delaney Agreement, final and binding. Ruth had printed it on heavy stock paper, each page sliding out of the printer like a verdict. The document smelled faintly of toner and inevitability. She read the first paragraph again, tracing each line with her finger as if balancing a column of numbers. Repayment of personal financial support totaling $54,000, with 3.5% interest, due in structured monthly payments commencing immediately upon signature. Greg didn't waste words, neither did she. She signed the bottom of the last page with her clean accountant's signature, crisp, centered, undeniable. Then she slid the pages into a manila envelope and sealed it with a firm press of her palm. When she stopped by the diner mid-morning, Carla noticed the envelope before she noticed Ruth's new wool scarf. "That looks serious," she said, arching a brow. "It is," Ruth replied, setting it gently on the counter. Carla tore off a sticky note from the pad near the register and scribbled in thick black ink, "Deliver with pie." She stuck it on the envelope. "Paperwork tastes better that way." Ruth allowed herself a small smile. "Maybe he'll finally chew on something that isn't mine." The sky outside was the color of steel when she pulled up to Ethan's house in Carmel. A clean-lined ranch with white siding, the kind that looked polished but hollow. Ruth parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment listening to the ticking of the cooling car. Her cane waited beside her, gleaming brass against the dull gray day. She picked up the envelope and stepped out, her shoes crunching over a thin crust of snow. Melissa answered the door. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her eyes darted immediately to the envelope. "Ruth! Oh, I didn't know you were coming." "Spur of the moment," Ruth said evenly. Melissa's smile was polite but tight, the kind that belonged more to a homeowner than a daughter-in-law. "Is everything okay?" Ruth offered her the envelope like an invoice. "Tell him this is his next check." Melissa blinked. "Oh, well, of course. I'll, give it to him as soon as he's back. He's at a meeting." Ruth's gaze flicked over Melissa's shoulder. The expensive decor, the faint smell of takeout, the unopened mail stacked near the kitchen counter. "Then I suggest he reads this one first," she said. Melissa nodded uncertainly, taking the envelope with both hands, as if it were heavier than it looked. "Thank you," Ruth added, already turning back toward her car. Her cane clicked once on the porch, echoing like punctuation. "He'll understand." Melissa watched her go, still holding the envelope like a live wire. Back inside, the house was too quiet. She set the envelope on the kitchen island, curiosity gnawing through her manners. The bright yellow sticky note, "Deliver with pie," sat like a dare. She peeled it off, hesitated, then slid a finger beneath the flap and unfolded the thick papers. Her eyes skimmed the first few lines, her brow furrowing, then flattening, then draining of color. She flipped through the pages faster now, heartbeat picking up. There was no check, no note, just a contract. Cold, legal, binding. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Melissa pressed the papers flat against the counter, staring at Ruth's signature. Steady, confident, final. "Ethan," she whispered under her breath, as if he could hear her through the walls. "Oh, you really screwed up." She didn't touch the envelope again, just left it there, wide open, waiting like consequence itself. The next morning, Ruth was at her kitchen window when she saw the dark shape of a car crawl up her street. The engine idled too long. Then the door opened and Ethan stepped out, bundled in a jacket, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He stood at her gate for a moment, face pale, eyes tired, the kind of tired that wasn't from lack of sleep, but lack of control. Ruth didn't move from the window. She watched him adjust his grip on the bag, then start the slow walk up her path. Her cane rested against the table beside her. She picked it up, tapped it twice against the floor, steady and sure. Outside, Ethan hesitated at her porch steps. The duffel slipped from his shoulder. The knock came early. Too early for decency, too late for denial. Ruth didn't rush to the door. She let Ethan knock twice more, each one weaker than the last. When she finally opened it, he stood there, duffel bag at his feet, the chill biting at his unshaven face. "Morning, Ma," he said, forcing a grin that didn't hold. "Mind if I come in? Kind of freezing out here." She stepped aside, not out of welcome but procedure. "Shoes off," she said simply. He kicked them off, dragging the bag behind him like guilt with a zipper. Inside, the air was warm and neat. Everything his life wasn't. Ruth motioned to the kitchen. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded, his eyes darting around the tidy room like a man trying to remember what respect looked like. "Yeah, thanks. Didn't sleep much." Ruth poured 2 cups, set one in front of him, and sat across the table. Between them lay a manila folder. She hadn't moved it since last night. "So," she said, stirring her coffee without sugar. "You found the paperwork?" Ethan gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah, about that." Melissa freaked out. "Said you sent, like, a contract or something?" "I did," Ruth said. "It's called a repayment agreement." He frowned. rubbing his jaw. Right. About that. The bank froze some stuff weirdly this week. Whole thing's a mess. We're short on rent, so I just figured till it clears. You'd come here, she finished. Same as always. He gave a small, awkward shrug. Look, I'll make it right, I swear. This was just unexpected. Unexpected, Ruth repeated softly, almost to herself. Yes, imagine that. He sighed, leaning forward. Can we just hit reset, Mom? You know I've been under a lot of stress lately. The market's garbage. Melissa's hours got cut. Ethan. Her voice was firm enough to stop him mid-sentence. You're 40 years old. Markets rise, hours fall, and your rent still comes due. You've lived your life, like gravity doesn't apply to you. His face hardened. That's not fair. Fair? Ruth leaned back, eyes sharp but calm. You mocked me in public. You've taken my money for years without a single thank you. You've turned my help into your habit. So no, I'm not worried about fair. The silence between them stretched long and taut. The clock ticked once, twice. Ethan broke first. So what now? You cutting me off? Ruth reached for the manila folder and slid it toward him across the table. No, I'm offering you a choice. He hesitated before flipping it open. The printed pages stared back. Legal language, payment schedules, her signature in clean black ink. What is this? He asked, already knowing. It's the path to earning what you used to take, Ruth said. Sign and I'll resume the transfers. With interest. Every month. On time. Until your balance is clean. Ethan laughed, quick, startled, humorless. You're serious. Always. He pushed the papers back toward her. You're really making me beg? That's what this is about? Ruth's gaze didn't waver. No, Ethan, I'm making you accountable. He stood abruptly, the chair legs screeching against the floor. Jesus, Mom, you're really going to make this about pride? You'd rather see us struggle than help your own son? Ruth didn't flinch. She reached for her coffee, took a slow sip, then set the cup down with care. I've helped you for 20 years. You've mistaken that for obligation. That ends today. Ethan stared at her, the stillness in her face more cutting than any shout. Finally, he sank back into the chair, jaw tight. You'd actually do this to me. I'd do it for you, she said. His eyes darted toward the folder again, as if the paper might soften if he looked long enough. And if I don't sign? Ruth folded her hands neatly. Then you leave. Empty-handed. He laughed again, but this time there was no sound. Just breath and disbelief. You really mean it? I do. Ethan's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, saw someone who wasn't going to bend. He shoved the folder aside. You've changed. Ruth's tone was almost gentle. No, Ethan, I just stopped covering the cost. He stood, grabbed his duffel and paused at the door. I'll think about it, he muttered. Take your time, Ruth said, but the interest starts tomorrow. The door shut behind him, the cold air lingering like residue. Ruth sat for a long moment, the cane resting across her knees. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, January 4th. Offer made. Subject resistant, emotionally volatile. Education ongoing. Her handwriting was steady. Final. The first spark didn't come from Ruth. It came from Carla. Late Saturday morning, Ruth sat at her usual booth by the diner window, the smell of bacon and coffee rising like old comfort. Carla came over with her phone in hand, grinning like she'd just served a plate of revenge hot and fresh. Hold still, Carla said, raising the phone. Ruth frowned. What are you doing? Documenting power, Carla said. The camera clicked. Smile like you just balanced another book. Ruth didn't smile, not exactly. but her chin lifted slightly, her polished hickory cane resting against the booth beside her like a quiet exclamation point. 10 minutes later, the post was live. Carla Sims, still sharper than most men in this town. By afternoon, the photo had 37 likes and a thread of laughing emojis from regulars who'd seen Ethan's dinner table mockery weeks before. Ruth saw it while paying bills online. She sipped her coffee, reread the caption, and clicked comment. Ruth Delaney. Especially the ones who forget who holds the keys. Within minutes, Carla hearted it. Then, half the diner crowd did too. The post spread quietly, local, petty, and lethal in the way small-town stories are. It didn't take long for it to reach Ethan. He texted her that night. Ethan. Mom, what is that post supposed to mean? People are messaging me about it. Ruth didn't reply. Silence, after all, was still her favorite form of punctuation. By morning, Ethan's defense had begun to unravel. A friend from his golf group posted a snide comment. Sounds like your mom's roasting you again, man. And Ethan responded too fast, too defensive. Ethan Delaney. She's not herself lately, getting paranoid about money stuff. It's sad, really. That was his mistake. He'd forgotten that Ruth had receipts. Literal ones. That evening, she opened her laptop and scrolled through the PDF she'd compiled, a redacted version of her family assistance spreadsheet. Every transaction clean, labeled, and time-stamped. No emotion, no commentary, just math. She uploaded it to her own Facebook page with a single caption, Ruth Delaney. Clarity helps everyone. The file's title said it all. Delaney transfers, partial record. People noticed. They always did when numbers replaced gossip. Within an hour, the comments rolled in. Subtle at first, then bold. Looks organized to me. Wish my accountant kept records like this. Redacted or not, that's one solid ledger. Ethan went silent online after that, but Melissa didn't. She posted a vague status later that evening, something about loyalty being a two-way street, and a crying emoji. Carla, never one to miss a punchline, commented beneath it. Carla Sims. Receipts matter. By dawn, Melissa's Facebook profile was gone, vanished like she'd stepped out of the conversation entirely. Ruth sat at her kitchen table the next morning, the weak sunlight slipping across her coffee mug. She wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. The world had adjusted its lens all by itself. Her phone buzzed with a message from Carla. Carla. Your son just called the diner, said we're ruining his name. Should I tell him names are earned? Ruth. No, tell him numbers are. She set the phone down beside her ledger and opened a fresh page. January 6th. Subject attempting narrative manipulation. Counteraction successful. External perception restored. She underlined restored twice, then closed the book. Outside, the slush on the street had hardened into thin glassy ice, fragile but sharp. The kind of surface that looked solid until you stepped on it wrong. Across town, Ethan sat hunched over his laptop, scrolling through his dwindling reputation. The jokes, the quiet pity, the unanswered messages. He slammed the lid shut and muttered under his breath, You want to fight, Mom? Fine. But Ruth wasn't fighting. She was documenting. And somewhere in her modest house, the brass handle of her cane caught the morning light, gleaming like a metal no one could take from her. It started with a knock at Greg Santos's office, firm, practiced, and punctual. The kind of knock Ruth Delaney respected. Inside, Greg's space was all clean lines and quiet menace, dark walnut desk, a single ticking clock, and folders stacked like judgments waiting for delivery. Ruth sat opposite him, the brass curve of her cane glinting under the desk lamp. He's hired counsel, Greg said, sliding a crisp letter across to her. Local firm, the kind that advertises on bus benches. Ruth scanned the letter. The words undue influence and mental duress jumped out like cheap threats. He's claiming I pressured him? She asked. Greg leaned back, folding his hands. He's claiming you're confused. That you didn't understand the financial transfers. Ruth gave a dry, humorless laugh. I balanced $1 million portfolio for a trucking company until I was 71. I could calculate his shame in compound interest. Greg's mouth twitched. The closest he ever got to smiling. Good. Because I've drafted a reply that'll shut this down before it starts. He turned his monitor toward her. 3 pages, each one measured and surgical. Line item transactions, notarized dates, electronic transfers, and scanned copies of every message Ethan had ever sent about temporary help. Ruth adjusted her glasses. You kept all my attachments? Everyone, Greg said. Your documentation's immaculate, by the way. You should teach a class. I did, Ruth said quietly. He just didn't attend. Greg chuckled, printed the packet, and placed it neatly inside a legal envelope stamped Response to Counsel, Delaney v. Delaney, Informal Dispute. This goes out today, he said, by courier, and when it lands on their desk, they'll either fold or double down. If they're smart, they'll fold. Ruth nodded, slow and steady. Send it. 4 days later, the phone call came. Greg's tone was almost cheerful. They dropped it, he said. No counter, no further correspondence. Their paralegal called to conclude amicably. I almost felt bad charging them for the read receipt. Ruth sat in her living room, notebook open, pen poised. That's efficient, she said. It's justice with paperwork, Greg replied. The best kind. After they hung up, Ruth didn't celebrate. She didn't pour bourbon or call Carla. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote, January 10th, case withdrawn. Subject legally disarmed. Phase 2, closure. Then she reached for a folder labeled estate planning and called her attorney back. Greg, she said when he answered, I'd like to make a change to my will. Removing someone? Yes. Emergency access privileges for Ethan Delaney, effective immediately. Understood. Greg didn't ask questions. Good lawyers never did. When they finished, Ruth hung up and looked around her quiet home, her sanctuary of order and arithmetic. The air felt lighter now, unburdened by expectation. The next morning, she walked into the credit union, her cane announcing her arrival with its low, confident tap. Linda Chu spotted her instantly. Well, Linda said, stepping out from behind her desk. I heard through the grapevine that your son blinked first. Ruth raised a brow. The legal grapevine? Linda grinned. The one that runs between attorneys' assistants and bank managers. More efficient. Good to know, Ruth said. They walked together toward Ruth's account terminal. Linda had already prepared a folder of closing statements and signed verification of the frozen transfers. Everything's squared away. You're in full control again. Ruth's hand rested on the counter, steady. I never wasn't, she said. That afternoon, a delivery arrived at her doorstep. A bouquet of lilies and white roses wrapped in silver paper. The card was small, handwritten in neat penmanship, for precision and patience. The deadliest combination. Elsie Ruth smiled faintly and set the flowers on the kitchen counter beside her cane. The blooms filled the house with a faint sweetness that didn't quite hide the sharpness underneath. She opened her spiral notebook one last time for the night. January 11th. Reputation secured. Legal standing intact. Subject silent. Then she underlined the final word, silent. Twice. The phone buzzed once across the counter. A new message from an unknown number. Unknown. You think this is over? Ruth stared at it for a long moment before replying. Ruth. No. I think it's balanced. She powered the phone off, set it face down, and turned toward the window. The street outside glistened with frost, each lamp post haloed in cold light. She picked up her cane, tracing her finger along the brass handle like the edge of a signature. Tomorrow, she'd start on the next line in her ledger. 2 weeks of silence had passed, the kind thick enough to hear your own heartbeat inside it. Ruth didn't chase the quiet, she let it come to her. It always did. On a sleet gray afternoon, Carla slid into Ruth's usual booth carrying 2 mugs of coffee and a smirk sharp enough to slice through the steam. "You're gonna love this," Carla said, setting one mug down. "Our friend Ethan tried applying for a bridge loan over at the credit union." Ruth's eyebrows lifted, though her hand stayed steady on her cane. "At Linda's branch?" "The very one," Carla said. "Got denied before his signature was dry. Apparently, his income verification didn't verify much." Ruth stirred her coffee once. "He's learning math the hard way." Carla leaned forward, lowering her voice. "What are you going to do now?" Ruth looked out the window. Ice crystals webbed across the glass, delicate but unbreakable. Give him something to count. The next morning, Ruth walked into the credit union again, her new cane tapping softly against the tile like a clock counting down. Linda smiled when she saw her. "Back for another audit?" Ruth handed her a slip of paper. "Reinstate the transfer. Just one." Linda squinted. "How much?" $50, Ruth said. "Add a note in the memo line. Crawl test." Linda blinked, suppressing a grin. "That's specific." "I'm teaching consistency," Ruth said. Within minutes, the transaction was live. A single drip of mercy. Small enough to humble, large enough to notice. That night, Ruth's phone lit up. "Ethan, is this a joke?" Ruth. "No. A preview." The typing bubbles appeared, vanished, then came back. Finally, his reply blinked on the screen. "Ethan, you're enjoying this, huh?" She didn't respond. Instead, she wrote it down in her spiral. January 15th, subject aware of new terms. Emotional response, defensive sarcasm, behavioral forecast, regression imminent. The pen moved easily now, as if her hand had been waiting for this rhythm all along. 3 days later, a neighbor, Mrs. Daniels, the one with the loud golden retriever, mentioned it casually at the mailbox. "Your daughter-in-law's working the register at Kroger," she said. "Saw her last night. Poor thing, looked beat." Ruth paused mid-envelope sort. "Melissa?" Mrs. Daniels nodded. "Guess they're trying to catch up on bills. That fancy SUV's been parked for sale at the curb all week." Ruth gave a polite, unreadable smile. "Well," she said, "work's good for the soul." When she went back inside, she wrote another line in her notebook. Melissa employed. Stability in progress. Observation. Secondary subject adapting faster than primary. Then she made herself a sandwich. Turkey and mustard. Plain. Unhurried. And took it out to the porch. The air still carried winter's bite, but the faintest hint of thaw was there too. She ate slowly, each crunch of bread like punctuation between thoughts. Across the street, a boy dragged a sled through slush, grinning despite the mess. Ruth watched him for a long while, thinking about how falling was inevitable. But crawling was optional. She closed her eyes and let herself enjoy something she hadn't felt in months, peace without guilt. The phone buzzed on the porch rail. A notification blinked. Video message from Ethan Delaney. She almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity, like old habits, didn't fade easily. She tapped play. The video opened with Ethan sitting at a cluttered kitchen table, hair unkempt, eyes bloodshot. In front of him lay the repayment agreement, the same one he'd once shoved back at her like poison. He took a breath, then began to read. "I, Ethan Delaney, acknowledge receiving financial support from Ruth Delaney and agree to repay the total amount, plus interest, according to the terms. His voice cracked halfway through, not with emotion, with exhaustion. At the end, he looked directly at the camera. There. You got your apology. Hope that helps you sleep. The screen froze on his face. Proud, bitter, beaten all at once. Ruth stared at it for a long time, her reflection caught faintly over his image. Then she pressed pause, leaned back, and whispered, "Not yet." She reached for her notebook. January 18th. Subject initiated formal acknowledgement. Delivery tone, performative. Lesson incomplete. She underlined incomplete twice, then closed the book. Outside, the wind rattled the porch railing. A soft, persistent reminder that even the strongest structures creaked before settling. Ruth exhaled, long and even. The silence afterward was richer than music. Ruth watched the video again in the stillness of her living room. Laptop open, volume low, the flickering blue light painting lines across her face. Ethan's voice filled the space, formal and practiced, his words stumbling over legal phrasing he didn't understand. I, Ethan Delaney, acknowledge receiving financial support from Ruth Delaney. He read it like a hostage statement. Every word stiff, his eyes flicking down to the page and back up at the camera as though he were waiting for someone off-screen to nod approval. When it ended, Ruth sat motionless. The screen froze on Ethan's face. Drawn, hollow, performative. There was apology in his mouth, but not in his eyes. She hit play again. The same script rolled out. The same pauses. The same false tremor in his voice. She muted the sound halfway through and watched only his expression. The flinching jaw. The upward glance. The tiniest smirk that slipped through before the last line. When the video ended for the second time, she closed the laptop with deliberate calm and whispered, "Still accounting." Her phone buzzed almost instantly. Greg Santos. Always perfectly timed. "Got your message," he said without preamble. "You received the video." "I did." "And?" "It's theater," Ruth said. "Bad theater." Greg chuckled softly. "You expected remorse from a man who thinks sincerity is negotiable?" "I expected accuracy," Ruth replied. "If you're going to fake an apology, at least balance it." Greg paused, the faint sound of paper shuffling on his end. "My legal advice? Don't respond. Let him sweat." "You've already won the case. No need to reopen it emotionally." "Good advice," Ruth said, "but I'm not in court anymore." "You're never not," Greg said, his tone half amused, half resigned. When they hung up, Ruth sat back, staring at the blank screen of her laptop. The reflection of her face was clearer than Ethan's had been, calm, intent. Tired only in the way satisfaction makes a person tired. Her phone buzzed again. Carla this time. Carla. "Saw the video. He looked like a man auditioning for forgiveness." Ruth. "He's not cast yet." Carla. "Then make him earn the role. Publicly. Like he mocked you." Ruth read the message twice. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard before she typed back. Ruth. "You think that's fair?" Carla. "Fair doesn't fix pride. Public does." Ruth set the phone down beside her cane, the brass handle catching the lamplight. She thought of that night at the diner, the laughter, the penguin joke, the eyes that turned away when she'd sipped her coffee instead of retaliating. Some debts weren't about money. She picked up the phone again and began to type. Ruth. "You want back in, Ethan? Post it. Publicly. The apology. The full one." The dots appeared immediately. The frantic kind of typing that came from a man bargaining with his own shame. Then they vanished. No reply. She waited. One day passed, then another. By the second evening, Carla texted again. "Carla. He's either drafting or drinking." Ruth didn't respond. She'd already opened her spiral notebook, writing neatly at the top of a new page, January 20th. Subject unresponsive. Resistance predicted. Patience advised. She closed the notebook, set it beside her on the nightstand, and slept soundly for the first time all week. On the morning of the third day, Ruth's phone pinged repeatedly, notifications lighting up the screen like fireworks. Carla's name was among the first. Carla. He did it. Ruth opened Facebook. There it was. Ethan's post. A long paragraph written in the stilted, over-edited cadence of a man forced to swallow every ounce of his pride. Ethan Delaney. I owe my mother, Ruth Delaney, an apology. She supported me more than I've ever acknowledged, and I failed to respect that. I mocked what I should have admired. I'm trying to fix what I broke. Hundreds of people had seen it already. Co-workers, neighbors, former classmates. Some commented hearts, others silence. Ruth scrolled through slowly, her eyes calm and unreadable. She didn't press like. She didn't comment. Instead, she copied the link, pasted it in her notebook under her latest entry, and wrote just one line beneath, January 23rd. Public acknowledgement achieved. Tone. Compliant. Authenticity. TBD. She capped her pen, folded the notebook shut, and leaned back in her chair. The window light caught on the brass curve of her cane again, bright as a verdict. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a smile. Small, precise, satisfied. The apology post lingered online like a bruise that refused to fade. By the end of the week, the comments had cooled, the shares slowed, and the pity likes stopped. Ethan's face had become just another profile photo again, humbled, public, and quiet. Ruth waited exactly 3 days. Precision mattered. On the morning of the 4th, she brewed her coffee, logged into her credit union account, and clicked transfer funds. Her reflection wavered on the monitor, clear, controlled, purposeful. She typed in the number, 100 siraj. Memo line, step 1. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat before she hit confirm. A quiet satisfaction settled through her as the confirmation message appeared. Small, green, and final. By noon, her phone buzzed. Ethan. You're really doing this one line at a time? Ruth. One step at a time, like I walk. He didn't reply. Not for hours. When he finally did, it was just a single ellipsis. Ruth stared at it until it vanished, then closed her phone with a sigh that wasn't regret, just arithmetic. That evening, someone knocked at her door. When she opened it, the scent of butter and sugar met her first. Carla stood there holding a box tied with red string. Made you something, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Celebratory carbs. Ruth raised an eyebrow. You're spoiling me. Please, you're the one running a masterclass in controlled vengeance. Carla opened the box to reveal a dozen cookies, each one neatly frosted white, and in the center of the box a larger cookie shaped like Ruth's cane. The handle was dusted with gold sprinkles. Ruth stared, lips twitching despite herself. Subtle. Carla smirked. Check the note. Inside, written on a scrap of diner receipt paper, were 3 words in Carla's loopy handwriting. Step 1, complete. Ruth set the note on the counter, smiling softly. I'll keep it with the ledgers. Of course you will, Carla said. You frame data like saints frame prayers. They sat at the kitchen table, splitting a cookie between them. The air outside was turning warmer now, the first hints of spring slipping through the frost-streaked windows. Ruth's cane leaned nearby, brass handle catching the lamplight. Carla gestured toward it. You ever think about hanging that up? You've made your point. Ruth's gaze drifted to the cane. Not yet, she said. Balance takes practice. Days passed with the gentle rhythm of peace reclaimed. The phone stayed mostly quiet. Melissa didn't call, didn't text. And when Ruth drove by Ethan's house once, The for sale sign was gone, but the blinds were drawn. No one came by, and that suited her fine. On Sunday, Ruth decided to host brunch. It wasn't spontaneous. Nothing she did ever was. But it was the kind of decision that closed a chapter. She printed invitations on her old home printer, simple cream cardstock with gold lettering. Sunday brunch at Ruth Delaney's. Neighbors welcome. 11 a.m. sharp. Bring nothing but appetite. By mid-morning, her house was filled with the warmth of scrambled eggs, laughter, and the faint scent of cinnamon. Mr. and Mrs. Daniels from across the street brought flowers. Linda Chu arrived with scones. Even Carla came late, still in her diner apron, hair pinned up with a pen. Ethan wasn't invited. Neither was Melissa. When someone asked how her son was, Ruth simply smiled and said, "Learning." It wasn't cruel. It was accurate. After brunch, the neighbors drifted out into the sunlight, full and content. Ruth stood by the door, thanking each of them, her cane resting lightly in her hand. Carla was the last to leave. "You know," she said quietly, "for a woman who says she's done fighting, you sure look victorious." Ruth's smile was small, but real. Peace is the best trophy. When the door closed behind her, Ruth turned back to the quiet house. The dishes waited in the sink. The leftover pie sat cooling on the counter. She poured herself one last cup of coffee and sat by the window. Her phone buzzed once. A notification. Ethan had posted a new status. Ethan Delaney. Doing better. Starting from scratch. Grateful for lessons. Even the hard ones. Dozens of likes already. Ruth read it once, then opened her notebook. January 30th. Subject demonstrating compliance through public humility. Secondary subject absent. Phase stability. Holding steady. She paused, tapped her pen against the paper, and added one more line beneath it. Forecast. Temporary calm before next correction. Ruth closed the book, leaned her cane against her knee, and watched the faint reflection of herself in the window glass. Steady, patient, undefeated. Outside, the slush was melting. The street looked new again, but it still remembered the ice. By the time February settled over Indianapolis, the city had thawed enough for roads to steam and tempers to cool. Ruth spent the morning polishing her cane, not out of vanity, but habit. Precision had always steadied her. Greg Santos's office smelled faintly of leather and ink when she arrived. The hum of a space heater filled the silence as he sorted through a slim stack of papers on his desk. Ruth sat across from him, calm and exact as ever. "The repayment contract," Greg said, sliding the folder toward her. "Notarized, binding, enforceable in civil court. I'd call it elegant, if law could be." Ruth opened the folder, her fingers brushing the embossed notary seal. The pages were dense, paragraphs of legal clarity rendered in black and white justice. "Looks clean," she said, scanning the first 2 pages. "But I want to add something." Greg lifted an eyebrow. "An addition?" Ruth nodded. "A clause. If he misses a single payment, even one, the plan restarts from 0. Greg studied her for a beat, then smiled faintly. "That's ruthless." "Ruth," she corrected, meeting his eyes. "Just Ruth." He chuckled and scribbled a note in the margin. "Consider it added. I'll initial it myself." By the time Ethan arrived, the afternoon light had dimmed to a brittle gold. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. His shoulders sagged beneath a jacket too thin for the weather. Greg gestured him in. "Have a seat, Mr. Delaney. Your mother's been reviewing the agreement." Ethan sat, avoiding Ruth's eyes. His fingers fidgeted against the edge of the desk. "So this is it, huh? This is accountability?" Ruth said. Greg handed him a pen. "Standard repayment schedule, first installment today, recurring monthly. Interest accrues quarterly." Ethan flipped through the pages, the sound of paper snapping sharp in the quiet. 3.5% interest? You serious? Ruth's voice was even. I'm generous. The bank would have doubled it. He looked up, trying for a smirk but failing. Guess you're the bank now. I always was, she said. He read a little more, jaw tightening. And what's this last part? He pointed to the clause she'd added, voice rising. If I miss one payment, I start over? That's insane. That's incentive, Ruth replied. He leaned back, letting out a breath somewhere between a laugh and a groan. You really want to make me crawl, don't you? Ruth adjusted her glasses. No, Ethan. I want to see if you can stand. For a moment, only the sound of the space heater filled the room. Then, reluctantly, Ethan picked up the pen and signed. His name came out shaky, like the ink resisted him. Greg flipped the final page, stamped it with the notary seal, and slid a copy to each of them. Done, he said, official as gravity. Ethan rose first, tucking his copy into his jacket. You happy now? Ruth stood, her cane steady against the floor. Happiness is irrelevant. Numbers matter. He rolled his eyes and left without another word. Greg exhaled, almost amused. You don't just keep score, do you? You write the rule book. Ruth smiled faintly. Someone has to. That evening, the first payment arrived, $100, exactly on schedule. The alert pinged on Ruth's phone while she was tidying the kitchen. She stared at it for a long moment, then sat down and opened her ledger. February 2nd. First payment received. Subject compliant, pattern not yet established. Then she picked up her phone and typed a text. Ruth. Only $47,900 to go. The reply came a minute later. Ethan. Seriously? Ruth. Completely. A pause. Then the familiar ellipsis. The tiny sign of his frustration. She set the phone aside and returned to her bookkeeping. One hand brushed the brass handle of her cane, the way others might touch a rosary, for steadiness, not comfort. Outside, a light snow began again, quiet and deliberate, the kind that blanketed everything, even pride. At 10 p.m., her email chimed, a notification from Greg. Subject, estate update. Please review, confidential. She clicked it open, expecting routine paperwork. But it wasn't from Greg. The sender's address looked familiar but wrong. A personal account using Greg's name. Attached was a single PDF labeled Proposed Amendments, Delaney Estate Access, Draft. Ruth's hand stilled over the mouse. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the screen's glow. She didn't open it. Not yet. But she knew one thing for certain. Greg didn't send that file. Ruth didn't open the fake email. She printed it instead, slid it into a plastic sleeve and labeled it in her notebook. Unauthorized attempt. Digital impersonation. February 3rd. Then she placed it neatly in a folder marked Future Evidence and turned off her computer. By morning, she'd already decided how to respond, not with confrontation, but correction. The world had spent enough time watching Ethan stumble. It was time to let it see what his name could look like under competent management. The Indianapolis Gazette had a small office downtown, old brick, the kind that smelled faintly of ink and ambition. Ruth walked in with her hickory cane tapping like punctuation, a manila folder tucked beneath her arm. The young reporter behind the counter, a woman with a messy bun and a press badge that read Tanya Kirkwood, looked up from her keyboard. Can I help you, ma'am? You can, Ruth said. I'd like to make a community announcement. Of what sort? Tanya asked, politely curious. Ruth handed over the folder. A grant. For local residents facing financial hardship. Sudden job loss, rent trouble, medical bills. I've already opened an account for it. Tanya flipped through the papers. The first page read, The Delaney Grant, founded 2025. Beneath that, initial contributor, Ethan Delaney. Tanya looked up. Your son? Ruth nodded. He inspired it. The reporter smiled. That's wonderful. Does he know? He will, Ruth said, her expression unreadable. Within a week, the story ran online and in print. A half-page feature under the headline, Son Inspires Elderly Resident to Create Community Fund Delaney Grant, aims to help locals in need of a second chance. The article quoted Ruth twice. Brief, precise sentences about gratitude, lessons, and rebuilding trust. It quoted Ethan not at all. The news reached him before lunch. Ruth knew because the call came in hot and fast. Mom, what the hell is this? Ethan's voice crackled through the phone. There's a newspaper with my name on some charity I've never heard of. Ruth's tone was calm, cool as ledger ink. That's the Delaney Grant. It's for families who've hit hard times. Sound familiar? He exhaled sharply. You're using me. This is insane. Everyone's congratulating me like I'm some saint. You don't like the attention? Not that kind of attention. You made me look like a charity case who gives back? Ruth interrupted. And you do, at least on paper. He went silent for a long moment, the kind of pause where fury and disbelief wrestle for dominance. Finally, you're unbelievable. I've been called worse, Ruth said. You can't just use my name. Your name was already attached to my money for years, Ethan. I'm just changing the category. That's not funny. I'm not joking. He made a sound, something between a growl and a sigh. You're trying to humiliate me. No, Ruth said softly. I'm giving you the one thing you've never given yourself. Purpose. Another silence. Then, quietly, he said, You really think this fixes anything? I think it documents progress, she replied. Do you want your name off it? He hesitated. No, just stop using me. Impossible, she said, and hung up. 2 days later, the diner was packed again. Carla handed Ruth a slice of apple pie, on the house, then slid a folded newspaper across the counter. The Gazette printed a follow-up. Folks are donating left and right. You've started something. Correction, Ruth said. We've branded something. Carla grinned. You're ruthless. Ruth, she corrected automatically, and Carla laughed until tears gathered in her eyes. When Ruth got home that evening, she opened her ledger to the newest page. At the top, she wrote, February 8th, public recognition achieved. Subject emotionally reactive. Perception shifting. Her phone buzzed again. A new bank alert. Deposit confirmation. $1,500 donation to the Delaney Grant. Ruth froze for a moment, staring at the number. It wasn't hers. Not the one she'd just made, but an automatic transfer she'd scheduled behind the scenes, disguised under Ethan's name. The exact amount he'd received from her every month. She leaned back in her chair, lips curving into the faintest hint of satisfaction. Then she drafted a short message to Greg. Ruth, estate update, Delaney Grant fully funded. Minor confusion over contributor identity. Greg, you're toying with him again. Ruth, correcting records. Outside, dusk spread across the street like ink seeping into paper. Ruth stood at her window, watching the lights flicker on in the neighboring houses. Her reflection hovered faintly over the glass, sharp, steady, untouchable. Her cane rested against the desk, brass handle catching the glow of her reading lamp. She reached for her notebook and added one last note beneath the day's entry. February 9th. Donation issued in subject's name. Symbolic balance restored. Then she underlined the word restored twice. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Ethan, you just donated $1,500 in my name. Stop this, Mom. She typed back one line. Ruth, consider it a refund. She closed the notebook, stood, and turned off the light. The house fell quiet except for the faint hum of her refrigerator. a low, constant rhythm, like the world keeping score. The letter came on a Wednesday morning. No return address, no typed label, just her name written in Ethan's uneven hand. The envelope was creased, smudged with fingerprints, as if it had been carried around for days before he found the courage to send it. Ruth stood at her kitchen counter, the winter light dull through the blinds. For a long moment she simply looked at the envelope, thumb running across the flap like it might burn. Then, finally, she opened it. The handwriting inside was careful, slow, deliberate, not the rushed scrawl of excuses. Mom, I don't know how to start this, except to say you were right. About everything. About the money, about the pride, about what I turned you into. A safety net instead of a mother. I've been angry because I was scared. You stopped saving me, and I didn't know how to save myself. Melissa's gone to stay with her sister for a while. It's probably for the best. I'm fixing the car myself. And yeah, that means really fixing it. Not just pretending I can. You don't have to respond. I just wanted to say thank you. For the help. And for stopping. Ethan. There were no promises. No apologies wrapped in justification. Just truth. Short. Plain. Unpolished. Ruth read it twice, then folded the paper neatly and slid it into a fresh file folder. On the tab, in her precise handwriting, she wrote, "Crawl log." The file went into the cabinet beside her desk. Not in the drawer marked family or legal, but in a new one she'd labeled that morning. Lessons. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the slush outside melt into thin ribbons of water. For the first time in a long while, her thoughts were quiet. Not cold, not triumphant, just still. That afternoon, she logged into her bank account. A small decision, one that felt heavier than the amount itself. She entered the numbers carefully. $250 memo, grace payment. One line, one gesture, nothing more. Her phone buzzed an hour later. Ethan. Got the transfer, I'll pay it back. Ruth. Don't. Use it wisely. There was a long pause. Then another text appeared. Ethan. For once, I think I will. She didn't ask what he meant. But later that week, she heard from Carla, who heard from Linda, that Ethan had used the money to repair his car himself. No upgrades, no gadgets, no indulgence. Just something functional, necessary, humble. Ruth smiled when she heard. It wasn't pride. It was relief, maybe. The faint, rare kind that came when the numbers finally balanced themselves. Friday afternoon, she stopped by Greg's office. He looked up from his desk when she entered, surprised. Something new to fix? He asked. Something old to adjust, she said, handing him a sealed envelope. It's my will. Minor update. He flipped it open briefly, scanning the first paragraph. You've added Ethan back in. Not entirely, Ruth said. He doesn't get access or control or decision rights. Just acknowledgement. Greg nodded, respectful. Mercy? Math, she said. I'm correcting the ledger. When she left, the sun was setting in amber streaks across the courthouse roof. The light made her cane glow like polished gold as she crossed the parking lot. That Sunday, the diner buzzed louder than usual. Locals packed in after church, laughter and gossip swirling around like steam. Carla wiped down the counter and poured Ruth her usual coffee before pulling up a chair beside her. You look lighter, Carla said. What's that about? Ruth took a sip. I got a letter. From him? Yes. Carla leaned back, impressed. And? He finally learned to write something without asking for anything. Carla grinned. Progress. Ruth nodded, looking out the window. Balance. Carla reached into her apron pocket and pulled out 2 tiny plastic cups of whipped cream, setting them on the counter like trophies. Then here's to it, she said, raising one. Ruth raised her coffee cup in reply. Carla smiled wide. From Cain to Kingmaker, she said. You did it. Ruth tilted her head, half amused. Kingmaker? Hardly. Don't sell yourself short. You built the rules, enforced them, and still left room for grace. That's queen-level work, honey. Ruth's laughter was soft, genuine this time. Then I suppose the kingdom's stable. For now, Carla said. They clinked cups. Ruth took another sip, watching the sunlight catch her reflection in the diner window. Older, yes, but unbowed. The brass of her cane gleamed beside her, a quiet symbol of both steadiness and restraint. When she got home that evening, the mailbox held nothing but flyers and bills. The absence of drama felt like a gift. She unlocked the door, hung her coat, and walked through her living room, the rhythmic tap of her cane echoing like punctuation marks in the quiet. On her desk, the crawl log folder sat exactly where she'd left it. She rested her hand on it briefly before switching off the lamp. The house exhaled into darkness. Then, faintly, her phone buzzed from the table. A new notification. A news alert. Delaney Grant receives anonymous $10,000 donation overnight. Believed to be from founding contributor. Ruth froze, the light of the screen soft against her face. Slowly, she sat down. Ethan, she murmured to the empty room. You finally learned addition. The diner was quieter than usual that morning, a gray drizzle tapping against the windows, blurring the world into soft shapes. Carla's radio hummed something old and low, the kind of tune that didn't demand attention, just filled the space. Ruth sat in her usual booth, her cane resting beside her like a punctuation mark. She was halfway through her coffee when the doorbell jingled and a familiar figure stepped in. Melissa Delaney. Her hair was pinned neatly, her coat pressed, her posture careful. The kind of presentation you practice before walking into an apology. She spotted Ruth immediately and hesitated, hand hovering near her purse before she crossed the room. Ruth, she said, her tone polite, too measured to be casual. Melissa. Ruth's voice was calm, even. Sit. Melissa slid into the seat opposite her, folding her hands like she was waiting for a job interview. Carla, ever the sentinel, appeared with a fresh cup of coffee, setting it in front of her without a word. Then she gave Ruth a quick look. You good? And Ruth nodded. Melissa took a small sip before speaking. I just wanted to say, thank you. Ruth tilted her head slightly. For what? For helping Ethan grow up. The words hung there, light but pointed. Melissa's expression was cautious, not grateful, not warm. Just relieved, maybe. The kind of relief people feel when someone else has done the hard work they couldn't. Ruth stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the mug. He's not done yet. Melissa blinked. I think he's trying. I don't doubt that, Ruth said. Trying is the easy part. Finishing, that's the difference between effort and change. Melissa shifted in her seat, eyes flicking to the window. He's different now, she said quietly. Calmer. He said you've been patient. Ruth let out a faint hum, neither agreement nor denial. Patience, she said, is just math in disguise. You wait long enough, and the numbers always tell the truth. Melissa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You always were good with numbers. I had to be, Ruth said. People lie, math doesn't. A pause settled between them. Carla moved through the diner in the background, refilling mugs, exchanging small talk with the regulars. Outside, the drizzle deepened, streaking the windows like gray silk. Finally, Melissa set her coffee down. He told me about the donation, she said softly. The 10,000. Ruth didn't flinch. Did he? He said it wasn't from him, that he couldn't have done that. Ruth's gaze didn't move from her cup. Then it must have been from someone who believed in what his name stood for. Melissa exhaled, a soft laugh escaping her, more weary than amused. You really don't quit, do you? Ruth looked up, eyes sharp but not unkind. I stop when the lesson's learned. Melissa stood, smoothing the front of her coat. Then I guess I'll let you get back to teaching. Ruth nodded once. You do that. Melissa hesitated like she wanted to say something more, then turned and left, the bell above the door jingling in her wake. Ruth sat for a while longer, finishing her coffee in small, deliberate sips. Carla stopped by, wiping down the counter near her booth. Peace talk go well? She asked. Peace isn't the goal, Ruth said. Clarity is. Carla grinned. Still running the world like a spreadsheet. Someone has to, Ruth said, standing and reaching for her cane. Outside, the rain had eased into mist. Ruth walked slowly, the tip of her cane tapping against the wet pavement in steady rhythm. Each tap sounded like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Not anger, not victory, just closure. A car engine rumbled nearby. She didn't turn until it stopped beside her. It was Ethan's, the same dented sedan he'd once threatened to sell when things got tight. Now it gleamed, not new, but repaired, honest. He stepped out quietly, closing the door behind him. His clothes were clean but plain, his eyes steady, older. The air between them was thick with the kind of silence that held everything words couldn't fix. Ruth stood still. Ethan didn't speak. He just walked to the passenger side, opened the door, and waited. For a long moment neither moved. The sound of distant traffic filled the air. Soft, constant, like time refusing to pause. Finally, Ruth stepped forward, the click of her cane echoing once, twice, before she reached the car. She looked at him. Not through him, not over him, but at him, as if measuring a man she'd built piece by piece. Then she nodded once and got in. Ethan closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side. As he slid in and started the engine, Ruth rested her hand over her cane, tracing the smooth brass curve of the handle. Her reflection stared back faintly from the window, composed, unyielding, at peace with her own design. Outside, the mist blurred the world into motion. She glanced once toward Ethan, his jaw tight, eyes forward, hand steady on the wheel. Then she said it softly, like a benediction. I walked with a cane. He'll crawl with character, if he's lucky. The car rolled forward, slow and certain, disappearing into the gray light of morning, a mother's rhythm, still in control.